Good morning, everyone. As has been the last few weeks, our Torah study is dedicated and in honor and in the zechut of those who are fighting in Israel and for shleima and for release. As we have already covered last week, the idea of spiritual responses towards the situation in Israel, or 2 weeks ago. Torah is one of them. I know that our son Yonah is studying in Yeshivat Netiv Aryeh, Shana Bet in the Old City, and part of their activities involve preparing packages and meals for soldiers and families and everything, including letters. And soldiers wrote back a message about how they thanked the students who were studying Torah in their merit. So it goes both ways, and this is how we will all try to respond in our lane. As we mentioned before, when Yaakov prepared to reunite with Esav, he prepared three ways: militarily, spiritually, and also in terms of diplomacy. So I don't know if there are any diplomats here, maybe they can get involved. Any soldiers here, they should fight, but we're here to respond spiritually in this session. So this morning we're going to look at the subject of leaving or not leaving Israel in dangerous times. This was especially something that was felt by those who were in Israel or visiting Israel on October 7th. People were there for the Sukkot holiday, or people who were visiting, who have students who were studying there. Right, Israelis live in Israel. That's their home, and they stay. What about the idea of those who were visiting to leave? If they were scheduled to leave, I don't see any question for us to talk about, but the idea of leaving in a difficult time, if they weren't scheduled to leave, it was a major and a very emotional issue for many. Anyone who has children there, anyone with children living there, there's the tension of the situation there. We all feel that tension. We all feel that angst and anxiety. But what about the people who were there for a semester, for a year abroad, and the like? And many of us have that situation. We have that situation in our home, or we have people who have children or grandchildren. It's something that's pretty common. And in the immediate aftermath was, how to get back, and the airlines started canceling flights. And so, one of the things that made its way into the arena in the second week after October 7th was how that the United States will take care of it, will help evacuate its citizens from Israel if anyone wanted to leave. First, in Florida took the lead first and had some arrangement. The United States, the State Department began issuing a link to a form that if you were there or had someone who was there and you want notifications, you could sign up for it. And then came the cruise ship to Cyprus. There wasn't an overwhelming demand for people to leave, but there was a mechanism that you would go from Israel, from the port of Haifa, you would go to Cyprus, and from Cyprus fly on to Europe, America, etc. So a number of articles that were covering this phenomenon. So source number one, our headline to rip from this week is from the Forward on October 17th. The passengers were greeted with sparkling wine and mimosas. A rabbi was on hand to assure them there'd be kosher options alongside the lavish buffet. Each was allowed to bring a 50-pound suitcase and a carry-on, but no pets. And they had to sign promissory notes committing to reimburse the United States government for the cost of their passage, estimated at $300 to $500. This was not your usual wartime evacuation. With many flights from Israel canceled, the U.S. chartered this mammoth cruise ship to get its citizens out of danger. It has a capacity of 2,416, according to the T-shirt sold in the ship's gift shop. But the Haifa port on Monday, fewer than 200 souls climbed aboard. Rabbi David Weberman welcomed people onto the ship. A native of Florida, he oversees kosher catering for the Royal Caribbean fleet of more than 60 ships. During the 6-month Haifa sailing season, he and his wife live and work aboard the Rhapsody. The ship left port a little after 3 p.m., 2 hours ahead of schedule, accompanied by U.S. warship off the port side and less visibly by the Israeli Navy and Air Force. Not enough passengers assembled to make a minyan for afternoon prayers. On October 7th, the day Israel was attacked by Hamas, where Weberman said 800 gathered to pray in the ship's theater. People have so many different needs, he said. Some need comforting, some have experienced trauma, some can't process it just yet, they're in denial. The basic thing is to listen. To see a figure like me brings a certain type of stability in a safe zone. A woman who spoke on the condition should only be identified by her first name, Adela, was on her way to her sister's home in Downs with her two young children. Her husband, Orion, saw them off, but then returned home to Rosh Hashanah to care for their 10 cats. You don't leave family behind, he explained. Michelle Barnett, who lives in Kalispell, Montana, said she was visiting her son, daughter, and one of their 7 children in the Golan Heights when the war broke out. I felt very safe at first until they started bombing, she said. So, interesting article, cruise ship, kosher food. The whole concept is an interesting insight into that type of a world. People tried to get out, some people going back home, some people evacuating. And one of the most interesting things to me in that article was the fact that you have a Jewish mother in Kalispell, Montana, with 7 grandchildren in the Golan Heights. Just kind of that phenomenon of you never know where people are going to end up and who it is who's the next generation is going to be. But you also have a certain amount of tension. We're leaving when we should be staying. You can't leave family behind. Was a sentiment expressed, even though that sentiment was specifically expressed for the 10 cats. But there's this idea, should I stay or should I go? And it's compounded on the issue of the role that Israel has in our religious geography, that it is an optimal, ideal place to be. The Gemara at the end of Ketubot talks about the special nature of the land of Israel. Living in Israel is one who has a God, and living outside of Israel, the one who has no God. The idea that there's the optimal geography for the Jew is in Israel. And how to, going there is a mitzvah, leaving there is problematic. The Gemara discusses how if one spouse wants to go, the other one doesn't want to go, then the one who wants to go wins the argument. And if it leads to a divorce, then then the spouse who doesn't want to go is at a disadvantage when it comes to some of the financial arrangements of the get and payment of the ketubah process. So there's a desire. Israel is a special place. It's a mitzvah to be there, and we don't like to leave there. In general, there's a prohibition of leaving Israel except under certain conditions, and so it's a matter of exploring some of those conditions. So we're going to look at a couple of sources about leaving Israel in general, leaving Israel in times of danger, and then a little bit of some spiritual perspectives that have been out there. And I think this is something that is often spoken about. Right? I know I've spoken to a number of parents who had this issue, grappled with this issue about their children staying or going. But the idea of there being a response on the subject are few and far between. And we'll see that makes it a little bit harder to talk about it from a textual perspective, but we'll see some things which may inform the discussion. Questions or comments on the scenario before we launch into a couple of sources? Okay, so the first source is a Gemara in Baba Basra. It's number 2 on the sheet, which talks about Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would say about Elimelech, who was the husband of Naomi in the book of Ruth, and his sons, Machlon and Chilion, who were married to Ruth and Arpa, were prominent members of their generation and were leaders of the generation. And for what reason were they punished? Why did they die? They were punished because they left Eretz Yisrael to go outside of Eretz Yisrael. As it is stated concerning Naomi and Ruth, and all the city was astir concerning them when they returned. And the women said, is this Naomi? The Gemara says, what's the meaning of this phrase? Is this Naomi? How does this indicate that her husband and sons were punished for leaving Israel? Rabbi Yitzchak says, the women said, have you seen what befell Naomi, who left Eretz Yisrael for outside Eretz Yisrael? Not only did she not escape tribulations there, she lost her status entirely. Is this Naomi? Look what happened to Naomi. Leaving Israel is the cause of all of her misfortune. And that is held up as a model of don't leave Israel in times of difficulty because you are held accountable for, on some level, abandoning the ship. So when it comes to some of the permissible scenarios of leaving Israel, they talk about getting to go find a wife and the like. But it comes up again in the discussed by the Rambam in the laws of kings and wars. Source number 3, the Rambam. It is forbidden to leave Eretz Yisrael for the diaspora at all times except to study Torah, to marry, or to save one's property from the Gentiles. After accomplishing these objectives, one must return to Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, one may leave Eretz Yisrael to conduct commercial enterprises. However, it is forbidden to leave with the intent of settling permanently in the diaspora unless the famine in Eretz Yisrael is so severe that a dinar's worth of wheat is sold at 2 dinarim, unless it's really, really, really oppressive conditions. When do these conditions apply? When one possesses financial resources and food is expensive. However, if food is inexpensive, but a person cannot find financial resources or employment, has no money available, he may leave and go to any place where he can find relief. Though it's permitted to leave Eretz Yisrael under these circumstances, it is not pious behavior. And behold, Machlon and Kilion were two of the great men of the generation. They left Eretz Yisrael only out of great distress. Nevertheless, they were found worthy of death by God. So the Rambam points out that there's a technical formula for when it's okay to leave. But even with that technical formula, it's supposed to hurt us to leave Eretz Yisrael and not remain in Eretz Yisrael, right? Of course, for the Rambam, there was probably the pain that he himself did not live in Israel. That's, very often people, whenever we study about the verses and the laws about not returning to Egypt, you shall never live there again. And the Rambam quotes that law. It's kind of pot and kettle, and how does that work? Sometimes real life is messy and it doesn't work according to plan. Although according to tradition, Rambam is buried ultimately in Israel. But the Rambam is laying out what is optimal. We're supposed to live in Israel, not leave Israel, and even if we have permission, quote unquote, technically to leave Israel, we're not supposed to want to. It's not pious behavior. We should push ourselves and go beyond the ordinary to stay. And the Rambam sees within this idea a certain, it comes up within the discussion about, in particular, when it's not necessarily about technical needs, right? The Rambam here is laying out to get married, to make a livelihood if things are difficult, if there's famine, etc. Certain socio-economic issues. We encounter another aspect of this within the laws of Milchama, Kings and Wars, a few chapters later, because we have in the Torah where it discusses those who have to fight and those who are afraid to fight, right? The Torah lays out if someone who just got married, they shouldn't fight. If someone just got a house, just got a field, there's certain exemptions from fighting at certain times. And, that too resonates with what's going on. And soldiers taking a leave and getting married and going back to the front and everything like that. I learned something on the trip that we had to Israel last week that under certain conditions, combat soldiers who are in certain family situations, like recently getting married, or who have siblings who are wounded or siblings who are missing or the like, are exempted from combat positions because they put themselves in danger, and to have a family have to deal with that with a second child is even more painful. And brings to mind the whole, Saving Private Ryan theme about we don't want families to have to go through too much. But so one of the places, one of the people we visited with was Rabbi Daron Perez, who is the head of World Mizrahi and has a story where he has one of his sons is missing, who was fighting on October 7th, and one was injured, and while recuperating, kept his wedding date and got married. And when we were there, he was about to go back to his unit, and they had to have the family, the parents of his son had to sign the waiver to have him go back to his unit where he's a paratrooper commander. So, so war, there are certain situations where people are exempt from war because of what their situation in life may be. So the Rambam says in source number 4, all those who return from the army camp return when they hear the proclamation of the priest, right? The Kohen makes mi ha'ish hayareh, mi ha'ish, who is the person in this situation? They must supply food and water to their brethren in the army and fix the roads for them. So just because you're not fighting doesn't mean you're not serving. There are ways to serve other than fighting, and we see that, in particular, with so many people stepping up to volunteer in different ways, in all sorts of areas of Israeli society today. So just because you're not on the fronts, you're not fighting in the army, doesn't mean you're not part of the effort. And then when the Rambam talks about this within the context of the mitzvot, where you're supposed to not be afraid of the enemy. Source number 5, God prohibited us from being afraid of the enemies during the time of war, and that we not run away from them. Rather, it is an obligation upon us to be resilient and stand firm and be strong against the other people. And anyone who retreats and runs away has already transgressed this negative commandment. And this commandment was repeated frequently, not to run away and not to retreat during the time of war, since it is possible to confirm the true faith with this matter. The Rambam sees an element of emunah as part of this, and that if a person flees or a person doesn't engage the way they should, there is a certain lack of faith that is being displayed in an inappropriate fashion. And one misses out on a chance to show one's faith by contributing the way they should to the war effort. And that is not just a need for the people, but it's part of the proper faith that a person is supposed to have. So in terms of trying to understand the question, should I stay or should I go? Or what are some of the background halachic issues of leaving or not leaving Israel in dangerous times? Well, yeah, if Israel is a place you're supposed to be. And if you're supposed to be there, you shouldn't leave there. And there are certain exceptions, but those certain exceptions are not necessarily viewed as the best course of action to take. And even when there are situations where maybe fully participating in the war effort are not possible or feasible, there's always a role to play, and shirking from that responsibility is viewed as a certain lack of faith in the Rambam's terminology that a person should play their role. And again, I don't think any of these kind of background sources tell us the appropriate behavior. We can identify, so you should definitely stay, you shouldn't go. But some people aren't necessarily there to participate in Israeli society that way. And, they're there to study for a year. And if they're not studying for the year and the classes are canceled, everyone's running to the bomb shelter all the time, right? This is not, I wouldn't stop with these sources and say, you have to stay. It seems that participating with the community is a wonderful thing and is a laudable thing and shows a certain emunah, but taking a different course of action doesn't negate any of this, and that's why we're going to look at some of the other approaches and some of the other experiences that we have seen that may guide us. Questions or comments on the presentation of the idea of Israel as the optimal place, limited rationale to leave, everyone doing their part to participate and stay and support. Questions, comments, or reactions? Okay. So the source number 6, is from Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Chassam Sofer. It's a note in his commentary to the Talmud Chulin, and he kind of talks about the role of the rabbi. And you have to remember, Jewish history, is always filled with situations where there were difficult conditions for Jews in various communities, and there were very oppressive times. Right, the Holocaust always comes to mind, but even other times in Jewish history, and going back further, you go back way back into the Crusades, you had Jews who were slaughtered for being Jewish, but you had different situations where anti-Semitism played a major role and made it hard for Jews to be Jews in their communities. It was also hard for rabbis to be rabbis. This came up in Tsarist Russia. This came up in the early communist period in Russia. This happened in different also periods of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that the Jews were at the whim of whoever was in charge of the area, and sometimes the local ruler would make it difficult for Jews to be Jewish, make it difficult, especially for the rabbis. So the Chassam Sofer, in tackling a piece of Talmud that relates to kind of spiritual leadership, says, source number 6, ubi drusha marti. This is a drusha. I mean, this is kind of rabbinic commentary on a situation. Sheremez lahem shelo yivrachu hatzadikim v'yanichu ha'am b'tzar. Ki kizayis ha'haganat tzarich lios b'makom mara b'tzara v'lo sheyanichu ha'am v'hem yivrachu l'makom chiyusa. So look, the righteous, the rabbi shouldn't run. and they should, because they're going to leave the people without leadership, and they're going to leave the people with difficulty. And having a small amount of protection and have some amount of solace and some amount of spiritual leadership is necessary in these dark, difficult, bitter places, and not to leave the rabbi shouldn't leave the people and run to where it's better for them. But then he says, "V'inu savru adarabba, kishamagina b'makom chiyus yichom hispalel uhishtadel." What happens if maybe the rabbis can be more effective? They can daven harder. They can work on raising funds and getting the funds delivered to the people in the afflicted places. They need a little bit of freedom to be able to do that. So they're not just together suffering with the people, right? Right. So he says that maybe he should be free, if he should free himself from that such environment and go to a place where he's able to help. And he says, I'm just raising the issue. I'm not here to solve the issue. And so that's another a way of looking at this. The Chassam Sofer lays out the situation. At least with regards to spiritual leadership or rabbinic leadership, should they stay or should they go? Should they stay with the people? Should they leave? And this was something that definitely had situations where this has come up again. More recently, the Holocaust. Before that, in communist Russia. Why should the rabbis stay or should they leave? And I think you have both sides of the Chassam Sofer represented in various personalities in Jewish history. You had those who tried to stay as long as they could, in some of the Tsarist communities, or especially some of the Hasidic rebbes, in the Chabad tradition, rebbes who stayed until they couldn't stay anymore because their lives were threatened. And some who wanted to stay even beyond that, but what good would they be if they were killed by the anti-Semites? And you had Rabbi Moshe Feinstein writes about this. He's one who who tried very hard, and you see that he references this in his response all the time to serve the Jews under the communists, but at some point it just became impossible. And on some level, that difficulty that was experienced that led to Rabbi Feinstein's departure led to his survival and led to the influence that he had over Jewry as through his halachos and through his halachic decisions and the role that he played. So it's sometimes interesting. I find it interesting when looking at some of the history of the rabbis in this period in World War II, who stayed and who went. On the flip side, you have Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, who went back to Kovna. He had been fundraising in America, went back to Kovna, and ultimately was murdered with his community, even though he was offered to stay in the United States. So there's, as the Chassam Sofer says, Ilaharikan, each of these is its own full conversation, and there's no easy answer, but there is. But there are two sides. There's rationale on both for this for staying or going, and this was definitely part of the something that definitely has a lot to talk about, and we're not going to resolve the situation, but we see that the Chassam Sofer raises the issue. The question of staying or going most recently in the more recent history, with something like this in Israel, happened during the first Gulf War. That was when the issue was very real, when there were rockets flying, and the question was staying or going came up within the person going to Israel, and in particular, within the yeshiva student population of Israel. This was especially something to discuss, because the question was, what should happen? And even within Israel and subsequent military operations, the question was, there are plenty of yeshivas in the south of Israel. Should they leave the south of Israel and go to other places? And there were those who There were those who said, no, we're moving to safer ground. And there were those who felt, no, look, there's a major yeshiva in Sderot. Right now, Sderot is mostly evacuated, but and this is a different type of military operation than previously. But in previous operations in the south of Israel, like, for example, in 2012, Operation Pillar of Cloud, some of the more Haredi and Hasidic yeshivas, the head said, go to safer ground. But those, the religious Zionist yeshivas and the Tivot, for example, or Sderot, decided to stay. So what's the right answer? Well, Chassam Sofer indicated that it's a complicated scenario. So now it plays out as well. And this was dealt with a little bit more substantially from a halachic and rabbinic literature level in the first Gulf War, where the question was raised about diaspora students going home or not. So you here had there too, there were both sides of the Chassam Sofer were taken. Rabbi Yaakov Ariel from Ramat Gan wrote an article where he condemned those who would leave Israel in times of danger, and felt it was demoralizing. It's having a negative effect. And then there were others who said, no, it's sakanat nefashot. It fits the criteria laid out by the Talmud, laid out by the Rambam. Go when it's dangerous and come back. So source number 7, Rabbi Gil's student summarizing the issue from Rabbi Yaakov Ariel. Rabbi Yaakov Ariel suggests that yeshiva students constitute communal leaders, Gedolei Hador, and therefore may not leave. Right? It's kind of invoking the calculus of the Chassam Sofer. He's talking about rabbis. So yeshiva students are similar. So student writes, this argument is difficult to accept. Perhaps the children of uniquely influential Jews are communal leaders. However, now that it is commonplace for nearly all yeshiva students to spend a gap year in Israel, they cannot all be communal leaders. Rather, it seems that halachically gap year students are allowed to leave in a time of danger, but it's praiseworthy for them to stay. When they stay, they show solidarity, that they want to make a statement in solidarity with Israelis. When they are soldiers of the same age risking their lives in combat, students can do their part by volunteering in the community or at least staying in their programs in Israel, continuing their studies. That, as he says, might be laudable, praiseworthy for them to stay, but halachically speaking, in dangerous times, they would be technically permitted to leave. He says that Rabbi Ariel's claim that all students are Gedolei Hador is a little bit, it doesn't really fit the reality. This was similar to what we saw with regards to ransoming prisoners, where we said you can go spend more than you normally would to save the rabbinic Torah leadership, and also promising students. Not every student is going to be the next Gadol Hador, according to the way a student looks at it. So you can leave, but it is something that may be praiseworthy to stay. It's another issue that can come up, and this gets a little bit complicated. And I think both sides of the question can emerge. What happens if a student wants to stay, but their parents want them to come home? Now, sometimes the parents are in charge because the parents are paying tuition, paying needs, and the like, and sometimes the parents have the final word, and that's something that students have to recognize. Another calculus could be that in terms of the anxiety that a parent would face, that if a student would push back strongly against the parent says, you got to come home, the student says, I want to stay, but what would that do to the anxiety level, or even the mental health level, or impacting the physical health level of the parent? It's something to be taken into account. I think that most of the times I can only speak as a parent. If I wanted my kid home and he said no, that wouldn't necessarily just be an emotional issue. That could be something, a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow. So we use this word a lot. It's always complicated, but we have it's complicated from the get-go because we're dealing with rules and values and meta values and the importance of Israel and our faith, and some of these things don't have clear-cut scenarios or clear-cut answers, as the Chassam Sofer acknowledged from the get-go, and is bound to be mixed up in ideology and in tolerance levels and in community, where people find themselves, in terms of just looking at the different responses in different segments of Israeli society to things that are going on. Is being played out in these sources. So just in terms of the spiritual component of this, I said when I was looking into the subject, I remember that in the Gulf War, there had been a comment made by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson that there's no place that is safer to be than in Israel. And they actually, I think there was a video that started going around. That started going around again now about the Rebbe saying that to someone who came to him. You know, the famous videos of all the Rebbe giving out dollars, and the couple that was there had a child in Israel and was asking should the child come home, and the Rebbe said, "Why? It's the safest place to be." And then the parent pushed back and said, well, they're not really studying. The classes aren't meeting as regularly. And the Rebbe said they could do other things there. So I remembered that, started looking a little bit further into some of the writings of Rabbi Schneerson on the subject. So source number 8. And in particular, the similar emotions that are coming out of this situation with Simchas Torah, 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, and the reaction to where world Jewry was after the Yom Kippur War, in terms of that also being a very demoralizing attack. So this is Rabbi Schneerson writing a letter, and it's a few days after Yom Kippur War, it's 12 Tishrei. Needless to say, in light of what is happening at this moment in our Holy Land involving our people everywhere, it is impossible to write a letter at this time without making reference to it. It's kind of, it's always, I always like how in rabbinic writing, they never say Yom Kippur War, but they say the situation that's happening. All right, so he's talking about the Yom Kippur War. I will only say here that these events once again demonstrate, and will do so conclusively in the coming days, what has been emphasized in my letter on the 6th of Tishrei, namely that our Jewish people have been given by God unlimited capacities, if they are linked with the age-old prophetic principle, not by my might nor by my power, but by my spirit, says God. At first glance, it seems somewhat at variance with the Torah's own principle that a Jew must do everything possible in natural order, not rely entirely on miracles. Yet it is an obvious truism and a matter of common experience that even in material aspects, when matching physical forces, it is not brute strength, sheer numbers, or the weight of military hardware the decisive factor, but rather the quality of the combatants and the sophistication of their methods. The character of the human element, its morale, motivation, selfless dedication, similar inspired qualities easily outweigh the purely physical disadvantages. And if this is so in the realm of the physical, surely the spiritual capacity of the Jew, a substantial part of every Jew's life, after all, in the realm of the spirit, are inestimable. There's no need to elaborate to you on the above. The fact that war will bring out the latent spiritual capacity is something that the Rebbe was writing about would be evident in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, and I think we see the same thing today in terms of the power of the spirit to evoke so many actions and activities, and a general sense in Israel about the ability to move forward and be victorious and help people and the like, and that it's not just about numbers and weapons, but it's about the spirit of the people as well. And I think that what he is writing is emerging after Yom Kippur, I think, is something that is very clearly on display here after the Simchat Torah 10-7 attack. And then with regards to this idea of Israel being the safest place in the Gulf War, so there actually was something that the Rebbe said in a lecture in 1991. Source number 9, there is no safer place in the world today than Eretz Yisrael. Heaven forbid that anyone living in Eretz Yisrael should think of leaving at this time. On the contrary, whoever is planning to visit Eretz Yisrael should go without fear and should let others know of his trip as well, for this will raise a confidence in the Jewish people throughout the world. The above is particularly true because of the great merit of the Jewish people today. Despite all the trials which our people have been subjected in the present exile, even the least worthy member of our people possesses as many mitzvot as a pomegranate seeds. Indeed, your people are all righteous. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, which I take pride. God takes great pride in every Jew. There's no way our mortal wisdom can comprehend the immense merit every Jew possesses. So, should you stay or should you go? He said back in 1991, go, because that's, and in fact, at that time, there was a major effort to send people. At Yeshiva University, they had a large, they sent several flights of students who went and studied there. And then, if, for those who recall, there was the whole, the gas mask era, and everyone in fear of chemical weapons from Iraq. and the Scuds and the Patriots, we've come a long way in terms of the protective measures. So whoever's planning to visit should go and should let others know as well. So hope people, if anyone's going, I think it's appropriate to go, and I please God will be there again for Thanksgiving. The Rebbe said I have to tell you, so I'm telling you. And the idea of it, again, it's a very personal calculus, and we see that there's both sides of going or not going, staying or leaving are represented in certain religious and halachic and spiritual values. At the same time, there is this confidence when it comes to Israel that what we see in the land of Israel, we see the people of Israel stepping up, even in difficult situations when pushed back initially by a terrible attack. Is coming to fruition. We saw it in the Yom Kippur War. We're seeing it now, and that on a certain level, as the Rambam says, well, legally there are certain steps that can be taken. This the pious, will consider taking a different approach if they're willing. It was interesting. I had when we were down the Dead Sea at a hotel that was hosting the evacuees from Kibbutz Be'eri. Someone came up to me, and his name is David Bernstein. He was a longtime head of Pardes, and he was there because his wife is a trauma specialist and had been called down to deal with the evacuees. And I said, look, I'm here with a group of rabbis. What do you think about people taking trips to Israel now? Is it the right time? Is it not the right time? Is there ever a right time? Is there ever a wrong time? So he said, he says it brings a lot of a comfort and a sense of stability to Israelis that people will come to Israel at this time. He said people who want to go should be, forewarned. It's not ordinary times. It's a little different. And he said people who have a lot of anxiety, and would react negatively when hearing the alerts for when rockets fall, which can happen, anywhere in Israel, and you won't know. They have to be aware of that, and that could be a concern. But he said that for the most part, it's comforting for Israelis that even in these difficult times, people are able to come. So, to me, that was, it's not a scientific sampling or a survey, but there's that idea that it's beneficial, and to some sense, it's mutually beneficial for those who are able to take the trip to do so, or to maintain the schedule to do so, and provide strength. And I think anyone who goes there will be strengthened as well. So, should I stay or should I go? It's complicated. Israel is a very special place, and maybe the safest place to be from a aspirational level. But there are challenges, and throughout Jewish history, our people have faced a challenge, and our spiritual leaders have faced that challenge as what to go. And I think like the Chassam Sofer said, "Ein laharich kan," he wasn't going to go further into it. We'll stop here as well in prayer that hopefully the question to stay or go should be obviated when the situation improves for the better and things are stable once again in Israel.
Amen. Rabbi